Listen. You notice whenever I use a term regarding intelligence in this, I keep saying new intelligence. And note I never say more intelligence. And the energy and the stimuli of sound, that is words, in our case being literate verbal creatures that we are, except for a hippopotamus that sees this in Montana. No, it's Idaho where he is. Other than that, it is not as obvious as it may sound at first, because it is not a basis of more intelligence. If you people, for instance, on tape, I may have seen this a few times, if you like this kind of stuff, if you get the impression that you're hearing things that you would have never heard, or that it causes you, it stimulates you to think about something in a way that you would have never thought about it, this kind of stuff, you ought to try and get some grasp on the fact that it is not possible just go out and do it on your own on the basis of some kind of additional, that is, more intelligence. Because more intelligence at the ordinary level simply means more information. Normally in the Western world referred to as more education, but at least more information, if I knew more. But it's not a knowing of more down at ground level wherein you're just having like groundwater seep out over a wider area. Because note, once I point out, note that the kind of stuff that you may lack from hearing this thus far. Notice it is not some expansion, it is not some expanding, it is not some retelling of any sort of information normally available. That's what I mean. It's not more intelligence, it's a different kind. It is not a retelling or a redoing or my version or somebody's version of conservative ideas, liberal ideas, supply side ideas, Marxist ideas, capitalist ideas, Christian ideas, Jewish ideas, male ideas, female ideas, hot ideas, cold ideas. It's not an expansion of any of that. Now I use examples all the way from economics to start with, religion and politics and all of that. But this is not really based upon any more intelligence. It's a different kind of intelligence. Whenever it was being done, if we were suddenly transported back in Earth time 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, and you people and I were involved with the same thing, it would still be new intelligence for its time and place. Not better, you're not superior in ordinary intelligence, because ordinary intelligence, given the facts of the way the 3D world stands, quite ordinary people can get more intelligence, that is, more education. They can know more facts about ordinary earthbound three-dimensional stuff. But if you like this kind of stuff, you just should take some note that what you're getting, what you're hearing, is not mere additions to ordinary intelligence, even though it sounds fairly verbally, sounds fairly routine, since I do not talk about spooks and ghosts and people from other planets, at least not seriously as far as you know. You know, weird stuff. We just talk about just everyday crap, stuff, things. I was thinking about the old story about some pope or some public figure that once he got in his position constantly would throw in, when he'd make some references, he'd say stuff about, and that kind of crap and this kind of crap. And like his PR man, so he had him back then, finally went to his brother-in-law or his mother or somebody and says, when he's out speaking in public, couldn't you, instead of him always saying stuff like that kind of crap and this, whatever he's referring to, couldn't you get him to come up with some other word? And his brother-in-law said, well, you don't know how long it took us to get him to say crap. Was that the joke for the evening? All right. Several down-to-earth, everyday examples hit me when I was thinking about new intelligence, and one of them, I'll be dragging this through tonight's taping. Not the example, but new intelligence. Not more. And what I started to say is not superior, that you people should know that's been around this for a while. It's not in any case that you are, in any ordinary sense, smarter than other people. You may be. That is, you may know more crap, stuff, things, information, facts. All right, you may know that. I don't care. You got to have a hobby. Go memorize stuff. Go to school. I don't care. Nobody cares. But this kind of new intelligence, it is not, in the ordinary sense, that which puts you in a superior position. So it is not that there is any kind of vanity, there is no kind of ordinary egoism. It is in no manner, that is new intelligence, anything that even puts you up on tiptoes or high heels to where you begin to look down on other people. And in case you find that you're having such an experience, you may trust me implicitly that you are not involved with new intelligence. But it is not a cause of some sort of routine celebration that now I'm smarter than everybody else. Because smarter than everybody else at the earthbound limit simply means you have more intelligence. And they even do not use it in the sense that I try to get you to see it, not as a verb or as a process. Instead of intelligence to them, it's just at the ordinary level, I am smarter. That is, I have now more information, I have more things memorized than they do. She does, he does. But new intelligence is not even comparable. There's no way to make a qualitative judgment between this and ordinary intelligence. There's just not any. And from some views, it's useless. It is certainly no badge of honor. It is certainly no stick to go around and try to beat up on the head and shoulders of those about you to make them feel intellectually inferior. An example. Surely some of you have read it. It's been popping up and down, but it's now getting serious, and it's just a beautiful example because it fits into some of even my ordinary allegories that I have been using as springboards, and that is having to do with ordinary evolution in the scientific sense. But a very specific one that shows the blindness in a certain way of ordinary intelligence. But by ordinary intelligence now we're into the realm of academia superstars. And yet they cannot see a certain thing. The particular one goes like this, that they have been over the last few years, and that's reached sort of a verbal wrestling climax between some of the theorists over whether life is actually evolving. And it's based upon this, a finding continually, but it started sometime a few years back, but a finding unknown, heretofore unknown, fossil remains of not just a little creature here and there, but hundreds of them that have not been known. And they are now scientifically estimating many of these fossils to be in excess of 500 million years old. So now one count, and there doesn't seem to be any great intellectual naysaying to this, that there was at one time many more forms of life on this planet than there are now. Not less, but more. Let's forget we've lost dinosaurs and we lost a fish here and there and certain birds are no longer here. It is not in the ordinary sense of evolution that it's getting more and more complex, and greater numbers of forms of life on this planet. Now they say the evidence is just one large count, that the evidence is overwhelming that we have less. So therefore the idea that life is evolving will not hold up. Note, now what I'm about to point out, some of you will surely hear it as soon as I point it out, and some of you may hear it tomorrow. But what I'm about to point out, there is no way, there is no form of more ordinary information would make these people see this. Now what I'm going to say is reasonable, and if you were just of ordinary intelligence, let us say just a modicum more of ordinary intelligence, I'd have to give you that much. You're just a pennyweight more than ordinary intelligence, and you're here, and what I'm going to say, you could hear it. And yet the people with strings of degrees, experience, the experts in their field now, paleontologists, biologists, cannot see this. Not because of their personal failings, but because of the degree, the kinds of information and intellectual processes life needs of man right now does not need where I'm about to push it. And what I want you to see is not that I'm right and they're wrong, because they're right for the time being. So they may be right until I die. That's not the point. But what I'm saying is a kind of absolute rational view, and of course it's more than that, but even at that level it's a rational, almost irrefutable view, or at least a view that you would have to say, if you had a modicum more of ordinary intelligence, you'd have to say, oh, why didn't they think of that? Or by God, that's more true than what they're saying. And yet, there is no sort of more information. Take a tape of me saying this and give it to the people who say life is not evolving, based upon the fact that there used to be more life forms than there are now. And so what I'm about to say, you could say, well, this is more information. And give it to them, they could listen to it, it'd make no effect. Obvious things would be, well, what's his credentials? I don't have any. Where'd you go to school? I didn't. That's enough, but even if they listen to it, it's all right, a layman's opinion, let's listen. They'd listen and go, what does it mean? I don't know, so they'd leave. What I'm saying is, it is not more information would make them see it. Nobody's going to see it right now. But now I want you to hear, because it's just a beautiful example, because this takes a new kind of intelligence. It's not an expansion of the ordinary facts. They've got the ordinary facts right down to where they want them. That is, to where life needs it. That we now have irrefutable fossil evidence right here, been carbon dated, been through the mill, scientifically speaking, and there is no doubt, it's not open to any question, millions of years ago, there were more life forms. Life is not getting more complex. It is not like an inverted pyramid or we're getting more and more life forms. We're getting fewer. And you cannot call that evolution. Now, that sounds like, by God, an awfully strong case. In fact, it's not even a case in a theoretical sense, the first part of it. That is, that there were more life forms. Let's accept that. Even the camp that's arguing with this does not dispute the fossil evidence, the hard evidence that, yes, there were more forms, and they're not sure what to say after that. Well, I know what they're saying. They don't use the terms, but they're beginning to verge back over into the area of theology when they have to say, well, you're right, there were more life forms, but, and they've got to come up with, I'm sure they got some new scientific term, which is really just kind of a smokescreen for theology and deities and anthropomorphism renamed. But at any rate, are you still with me? Here's what ordinary intelligence cannot see. And no additional ordinary intelligence would make them see it, them or anyone. And it's this. Let's assume, just assume, let's accept the fact that there were more life forms in prior times, and there are fewer now. That proves, that is almost certain proof that life is not, at least not necessarily, evolving, because you cannot call it progress to go from more life forms to fewer. Well, now we got to leave ordinary intelligence, even additional ordinary intelligence, and go in another direction. Well, except ponder this. They cannot see that man has become so adequately complex that life could do away with a multitude of one-time experiments, that life could dispense with many, many forms, simpler forms of life, that they're not needed. That man now, intellectual man, is now serving the same kind of purposes, perhaps that 12,000, just to come up with a figure, that 12,000 extinct reptiles, birds, amoebas, protozoa have just gone. But notice, that was their proof that life is not evolving, because we had more forms. And they will even admit this. The forms were simpler, or at least simple forms of life. The fossils they're finding do not resemble humanoid. They're not claiming that. So they would agree that now the life forms, these hundreds of thousands perhaps, or whatever it is, the figure, that now you are sure that you have proof at one time existed here and are now gone, they were simpler forms of life vis-a-vis man. They would admit that. Of course, they would say, well, that's not the point. But they cannot see, that is ordinary intelligence, not the people individually. But ordinary intelligence is not now wired and primed up with a necessity to see the fact that intellectual man, the nervous system of man now is such that it can compensate for X number, and I don't care what the number that they ever come up with, hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands of extinct forms of simpler life. If now man's nervous system is complex enough that it can serve the purpose that the degree of ordinary intelligence right now, for the ordinary people on this planet, would be at such, if we had some way to draw out a two-dimensional comparison, and fill in any blank, hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands of simpler forms of life that at one time were here and are now gone, the complexity of a human nervous system is now such that it replaces whatever all those forms of life are doing. Now, I'm not giving you a theory, I'm telling you a fact, although this is not the kind of terms that I would necessarily come up with. I don't mean I'm hiding any, there are none. I'm just taking this example. It is not a theory based upon what I'm using as a material springboard. What I'm telling you is a fact. Life did not need whatever these amoebas, these protozoa, the reptiles, little mammals, whatever they were. Life no longer needed what they were doing, or life would not have extincted them. The extinction of any particular life form, if you want to get real technical, in a new direction, not the ordinary direction, but along the lines of what I'm talking about, if you want to get real technical, it is either that whatever purpose that life form was serving, which always is some degree of energy transformation and transmission, then life either did not need it, it was like some blood vessels feeding a part of the body that life no longer needed, and you can lose blood vessels, as you know. You can get gangrene, you can get varicose veins. I know gangrene you got to finally treat, but varicose veins. Don't any doctors write me. Varicose veins. The veins just die out, they're not feeding, and you go ahead and live. So, simpler life forms, if you want to look at it real technically, even from an extraterrestrial view, which makes it real technical, life either had no longer, in that particular way, through that particular creature, a need for whatever kind of way in which it was transforming and transmitting energy. It no longer needed that, which I'm going to tell you is, well, for one thing, it's not even of any particular interest to us. What good does that do you? The other is that whatever it was serving, man is now serving that purpose. Imagine if they find, if any of you think you're missing it, I'll go ahead and even try to make it cruder. What if they find 100,000 fossils of one-cell creatures, forms of protozoa and bacteria, viruses, amoebas? Let's say 100,000, they just disappeared. And now life makes that particular group of people, that is, that line of intelligence, go, well, now that's very interesting. Not only this may be my entree into being published and a better name recognition for me, but that really throws a monkey wrench into the good old Darwin mechanicalistic idea of evolution really being evolution, that is, of life becoming more complex, more conscious, because something's wrong if we know for a fact that 100,000 different forms of life just disappeared. But what could 100,000 one-cell creatures, just based upon, if you can recall any high school biology, if you're going to have somewhere to jump off with this for a second, how could you take 100,000 of them? I don't guess you would argue that even one human, let's just say even a priest or a bricklayer, just an ordinary guy, to compare the complexity of one human to an amoeba, to any one cell, you'd say, all right, no real comparison. All right, what if you change the quantity of the ratio, and you add 100,000 separate, that is, different species of amoebas? Are those 100,000 together, are they going to compare with one human? And yet, the ordinary intelligence, it would say that there is something so suspicious that it almost verges on proof that life is not getting more complex, because you cannot take the disappearance of hundreds of thousands of life forms and say that life is getting more complex. Something's wrong. It's like some sort of, perhaps, genetic ice age may be creeping on us, that creatures, species are dying out. That's sort of frightening, at least intellectually. It puts a chill on the idea that life is continually, mechanically blossoming, and this tree of life coming up from the roots and the trunk and keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. No, no, no. The proof is now showing the son of a gun getting smaller and smaller and smaller. That we're losing species. Not only these X number of hundreds or hundreds of thousands of simpler forms of life back then, the fossil remains of which prove it, but today, in our lifetime, we have certain species that no theory have died out in our lifetime. Certain birds, certain mammals, certain reptiles. And then, of course, it's one step into ecological Cassandraism of hollering we're all about to be done for, that we're killing off the planet, that we can't do away just indiscriminate with a whole species of bear or panther over here or some fish. It just shows that we are becoming more simplistic. It shows the insanity of humanity and blah, 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 blah. And note, no one at the ordinary level, no amount of information will make this come about, that they'll turn around and realize, well, wait a minute. The human nervous system, the complexity of humans, or if it makes the example sound more forceful to you, the one human, the nervous system of one reasonably functioning, intellectual, verbalizing human can compensate for the loss of hundreds of thousands of amoebas, reptiles, blah, blah, blah. That the complexity, the growth of life has been specifically through man, not through a proliferation, much less a continuation of simpler forms of life. What does life need simpler forms of life for that may take hundreds of thousands of simpler forms, whereas one human that got his high school degree from the back of a matchbook cover, and driving a cab, driving a limousine, a rabbi, anybody, that this one person can fulfill is as complex as thousands or hundreds of thousands of simpler forms of life. I mean, doesn't that just want to jump right up and bite you on the, I was going to say the ass, but they don't mean bite you on the head, on the brain, and go, well, yeah. And yet no amount of ordinary information, that is, it's not more intelligence, would make people, including the experts, suddenly go, geez, there's no debate here. There's no argument here. You're right. That is, the information is right. The information is more telling. To intellectualize about it in this way, it makes me smile, which is a real extreme form of that makes sense. That takes away the idea that I have to be aggressive to some other theory. It helps merge what appears to be two opposing possibilities. That is not the purpose of the ordinary intelligence of life, thus the ordinary function of intelligence in people. But once you can begin to think in a new way, that sort of stuff is just there. Now, would anyone like to compare all of that with an individual man weeding out the more simplistic forms of intellectual life within himself? Aha! To kill off, to extinct his own more primitive forms of thought, of ideas, opinions, beliefs, everything that can happen in the top end of the nervous system. That a man plays his own grand executioner. He fossilizes, that is, he extincts, he does away with, he weeds out the simpler forms of life in his own brain, leading up to a more centralized, a more complex brain operation that he has now, in a sense, created his own form of, back on the large level, the apparent outside level, that man, thinking man now can replace hundreds of thousands of extinct lower forms, more simplistic forms of life. Then in an individual level, allegorically speaking, in a man's own brain, it's as though he has now produced or is in the process continually of producing his own intellectual thinking creature up here to replace all of the more simpler, lower forms, more primitive forms of thinking. That doesn't sound like what all this kind of stuff might be about. In a sense, what you're looking for is, or striving for, is fewer euglena, one-celled ideas. Fewer of those is your intellectual evolution individually, and more anthropoidal ideas. Why should you deal with amoeba thoughts? Everybody else does, but why should you? If you find out that you can weed them out, and instead of having 100 little forms of opinions about this and that, about religion, about sex, about everything, that you can put the hoodoo on them, like these ideas of great comet attacks that wiped out the dinosaurs, you know. As you look at these cumbersome, overweight, if not one cell, just think about the size of dinosaurs, and at least used to, the idea was they had brains about the size of your little toe, to just go and wipe them out and replace them. Who needs all that if, now of course ordinary people do need all that. Life needs all that at the general local level. But if you can replace all of those simpler forms of thought with a more complex, centralized operation, would you not be as an idiot in the same way life would have been an idiot to keep around and have to feed and have to look after 100,000 simpler forms of life when it can produce man, and man can replace all of that? Efficiency has got to be the name of the game. Maybe that would be the ultimate insult, or one of them, if people from a higher dimension would insult those of a lower. Call them euglena brains. Just a silly joke, folks. See if you can find the connected dots here then. You recall a few taping nights back I pointed out that by life sending out all of the up-to-date health tips down into its own system, that as long as it is sure to send out all of the information to all three dimensions, that is, to all three parties involved. Remember what I told you about? I was re-quoting an old adage that one can keep a secret, two, perhaps, tell three, and everybody knows. So life does the same thing. It sends out all information to all three forces, that is, all three dimensions at our level. Even when it apparently, the information it's sending specifically to you, it also sends out to all of those that oppose you, your enemies. If you are height, it sends out the same information. Let us say, in this case, breadth is in a struggle with you over this. It sends out all information to the specifically most interested party, sends out the same information to its enemy, and it sends out the same information to, for the time being, those who appear to be disinterested in it all. But as long as it sends out information to all three, there's no such thing as a secret. The same way as it is, as per that old adage, at the human level. If you tell three people, forget it. Gotham City knows it. Everybody knows it if you tell three. So life does that. Now we're up to date, right? See if you can connect that with some of what I'm talking about tonight. Specifically, you can't use more ordinary thinking about this. You can't use more ordinary pondering and reflecting. You got to use some kind of new to follow what I'm going to say, or for it to make any useful sense. At the 3D level, the information going out, we got a world run by three dimensions, a certain level. But let's go down. At the 2D level, which would be somebody operating at less than the intellectual level that is ordinarily available. And don't take 2D level as being some kind of science fiction crap. See, I said crap. Because you can be operating at a two-dimensional intellectual level right where you are. All you got to do is be less intelligent. That is, using less of the intellectual function than is even ordinarily available. You can be operating at a two-dimensional level. So at a two-dimensional level, its view of a 3D world would be that it's impossible. Now, a 3D world looked at from a 3D level, let's move up, that is, from its own level, a system trying to look at itself from its own level. From that level, a 3D world to from a 3D view would be imponderable, inexplicable. Just like ordinary people now, they can't really explain what the hell is going on. Now, but let's go on. From a more complex level, looking at a 3D world, it would then become impertinent. I repeat, you can, if you need to, it's all right. I know when I bring up the examples that it can stimulate one to start that way. If you want to try right now, if that's what seems to be most efficient, to really think about it in a more material way, that there are like 3 levels at least, of which you could have existence, creatures of some kind, like a 2D level, and them in some way attempt to look at a 3D existence, a 3D world. And the 3D world, of course, creatures there attempting to look at themselves, and then imagine there's something like a 5D world, and it attempts to look at the 3D world. Even though I said it wasn't science fiction of some kind, you could actually look at it as being spatial realities, and if there's a 2D world over here attempting to look at a 3D world, and there's a 3D world, of course, looking at itself, which it can attempt to do without any further explanation, and then, say, a 5D world attempting to look at the 3D. Or, if you're a little quicker of neural foot, consider this is all possible within humanity. This is all possible if you're even quicker yet, and you got on your cerebral Nikes, is you can look at inside one individual of your own brain, being able to look from a more simplistic level, 2D looking at 3D, at its own level, a system attempting to examine itself, or from a more complex level, which would not be facilitated by having more information of ordinary, that is, more intelligence. You got to have new. But if you could get outside the limits of ordinary 3D thought, then you would be attempting to look at your 3D world here from, let us say, a 5D, a more complex level. So, right now, either one of those two, or any others, but those two that seem to offer the most promise, try and hold it a second, and let me go back over what I said. This is all regarding a 3D world, which is where we spatially, materially, that is, physically, exist for these few decades. This 3D world, when it's attempted to be looked at from a two-dimensional position, that is, a position of intelligence, consciousness, that is less than is ordinarily available. From that view, from a lesser view, from a two-dimensional view, if it were possible, that they in some way, could look at a three-dimensional world, it would find it to be impossible. And don't let the contrariness of the words throw you, because the 2D view based upon the limits and the rationale of three-dimensional verbalization couldn't see it, right? What if it heard about it? That you could describe it in detail, and you described it to a 2D view, 2D thinking, 2D intelligence. You described the 3D, and it could hear it, and you could make it conform to two-dimensional logic. Then a two-dimensional intelligence could hear it and say, all right, yeah, I hear that, but it's impossible. In other words, it is science fiction. Because that's all it would be left with if it could see it. Take your choice, whichever helps you the most right now. Essentially, if it could take a view of a more complex world, if that temporarily trips you up, consider if it could theorize over an explanation, a description, to where you could describe a 3D world and a 2D intelligence could go, yeah. And then you got through and you go, well, yeah, but that's impossible. That would be 3D reality, 3D intelligence, looked at from a two-dimensional view. 3D reality, a 3D world, 3D intelligence looked at from a 3D level. That is, would be such as in our case, ordinary people looking upon life as they see it, as they experience it, as other people say they experience it. Looked at at its own level, a system attempting to study itself, a person attempting to. What does it come out to? I'm going to stick by my first word, imponderable. Notwithstanding, if there are people around, they'll slap their fist and holler that the gods have spoken to them and they know what the hell's going on. Everybody knows right before you go to sleep. Everybody knows that nobody outside in the ordinary world, they don't know what's going on. You know you don't. The whole thing, you look at it, you try to be reasonable, you try to be unreasonable, you take dope, you don't take dope, you listen to soothsayers, then you don't listen to them, then you laugh at them, then you criticize them, then you look over here. But at its own level, 3D intelligence attempting to look at 3D intelligence finds it imponderable. Now, from a more complex view, let us say 5-dimensional intelligence, from a 5-dimensional world, it would look upon 3-dimensional existence, 3-dimensional intelligence, and find it to be impertinent. Not wrong. Not imponderable, because it would certainly be able to ponder it, because part of the pondering of it would be within the existence of a more complex reality. They don't find it impossible, because they can certainly see it. They can see it in the same way that you can look down. Let us say that you're more complex, let's just say, than your ankle. You can look down at your ankle, right? I mean, there's nothing impossible about an ankle. There's nothing really imponderable about an ankle. But you cannot turn around, of course, and present the same kind of query to an ankle. So from a more complex view, looking at a 3-dimensional world, a 3-dimensional intelligence, it's not impossible, certainly, and it's not imponderable, it's just impertinent. Because the information available at this lower level, as always, is not wrong, it's just incomplete. What could a 5-dimensional view learn from a 3-dimensional view? What could 5-dimensional intelligence learn from 3-dimensional intelligence? It wouldn't have any questions, it wouldn't have any trouble realizing they exist, because it exists within it. To stay with my examples, there can be no 3-dimensional secrets to 5-dimensional intelligence. Now, I gave you a choice, but before I wrap up this paragraph, now you got to drag it all internally into you and your own attempt to think in a new way, even if you don't know that's what you're doing. If you're not just passively being entertained by these tapes, which is all right, but if you're attempting to find out how to entertain yourself, which is more than all right, it's more fun than these tapes, believe me. It is. Plus, you don't even have to come out and see the tapes when you can do it yourself. But looked at from an internal view, if you simply continue to try and study you, life, the nature of life, the questions of life, why the Dow Jones does what it does, why Marx ended up living in a capitalistic country and is buried in the middle of London with a statue, or why it is that we continue even into the 1990s to find one shoe laying out on the highway continually. All of these questions inside of you if you attempt, and all these are 3D questions, 3D problems, 3D areas of disquieting in the history of man. All of these are three-dimensional areas. So if you attempt to look at them inside of you at less, to start with, let's call it a two-dimensional view, that you are less intelligent than is just ordinarily available. You're just less intelligent, my God, than an Episcopalian or a Republican. Don't write me. That you're less intelligent right then, you're going to find whatever it is, no matter how simplistic it is, you're going to find the whole thing impossible. So, need it be said, all right, that you can't get anywhere at that level. Operating on that level of intelligence, you're really pushing it. I mean, you're pushing it to even call it intelligence, right? It's the kind of thing you stand around when you find yourself in that position and slap yourself about. Just because the secret police operations are falling apart in Eastern Europe, even as we were talking, no sense you can't take yourself, say, come over here and take yourself into a dark chamber and here, say, you silly son of a bitch. Snap out of it. At least get to the level that you can tell whether it's raining outside, to take your finger out of a wall socket. Allegorically speaking is the most important. And then continuing it internally on an individual level is you attempting to look again at all the problems, all the questions of life that you may have, all the imponderables, all the uncertainties, all the injustices. If you attempt to look at it at its own level, it doesn't matter how much more information you get, how much more education you get, that is, how much more you can intellectualize at the ordinary level. You can spread out. If you start out, and we took the whole possibility as being a large plane, and you start out and your ability to intellectualize was the size of a $50 out there on this almost, let's don't call it an infinite plane, a finite plane, but a real big one, all right? You can expand your ability to intellectualize from a $50 to the size of a truck tire, all right? To the size of a soprano's rear end. You can keep expanding on that level. That is more intelligence at that level, and it will never become ponderable. It will always be inexorable, inexplicable. You will never understand what's going on. Nobody ever has. Nobody ever will, even though the game changes, the odds change, the rules change a little. But just adding more intelligence at the system's own level. This is true with man. This is true with all of man's inventions and technologies such as, I hate to bring it up again, but computers. A system cannot comprehend itself, much less a system subsystem. A father's never going to understand himself. So a son's never going to understand the father. You got that? A bicycle will never understand itself, and it's certainly never going to bicycle with training wheels, or a tricycle will never understand a bicycle. You following? A system cannot comprehend itself at its own level. If it could, we wouldn't be staying here. If it could, nobody would. You wouldn't even have to take philosophy as an undergraduate course. And of course, all the synagogues and temples and churches would be down, and I don't know what the hell we'd be doing then. I guess everybody be in line that were there would now be in line for movies. But at any rate, systems, humanity, intelligence, in the case I'm using now, the attempt to conceive of and to study the 3D world cannot be done in any useful manner from its own level. So what are you left with? According to what I've sketched out for you, which is a darn good sketch, you have got to have a more complex view. You have got to be certainly beyond a less view. That is, you got to be beyond two-dimensional viewing. You got to be beyond three-dimensional viewing, because that's never going to change anything. The information has already been sent out. When life sent it out, it went to all dimensions. Except everyone believes, all the dimensions believe that they're in some way the favored nation. That the information we got, the goods we got are the real goods. What they got over here are sham goods. This is stuff, that information that my opponents have was made in Taiwan. Now, I know shoddy info when I see it. You have got to get even beyond the 3D view. It is only there that then it all not only is possible, which is, once you see it, is sort of silly for ordinary people to say, well, that's not possible. Well, if it's not possible, how can you say it's not possible? In other words, people that say, well, that's not true, that's not possible. Well, there's the proof. It says you only got a piece of the info if life sends out info having to do with something. At least 1/3 of life's human components, at some time, at least 1/3 of them are going to stand up and say, whatever we're talking about, that's not possible. And it may be educated, it may be three-dimensional leaders at the time that will say, that's not possible. The reason I got off the track there for a second with some of you is you laughed, and I want to be sure that you were laughing in the right break in the program. Is to call something impossible from a 5D view is just, it's silly. That's not even the word, because it's not pejorative silly like the people are. But for a 5D view to look down at itself, I can always go back to this seems to help. It'd be like your liver. And let's say that your liver is a liver among livers. Or at least within inside of you, your liver is an organ among organs. It'd be like your liver saying, yeah, I've heard of kidneys, but it's not possible. They don't exist. And from your brain view, let's assume that your brain has Superman vision and all that, and can actually look down, and it looks down and it sees the liver. I mean, it's a hard-working liver, probably went to, maybe got a scholarship to liver Harvard. Your liver is no dummy when it comes to livers, and your liver says, no, I've heard all the kind of tales about kidneys. It's not possible. There's no such thing as kidneys. And you look down, and it's beyond saying silly. The brain would not even get in any discussion with some other brain, much less the liver or the kidneys, in this case the liver, of discussing whether it's possible. It would look down and see that the liver cannot see the kidneys. And so the liver says, well, there's no such things. All of my intellectualizing is liver-based. The liver's reality is all jaundice. That is, everything's yellow. Of course, that's a bad example because most of the kidneys' reality is yellow, isn't it? Never mind. Getting off the track. At any rate, the liver would say, as an upright, intelligent liver, having all the ordinary intelligence a liver could have, says there's no such thing as kidneys. They're not possible. And the brain could look down, and the brain, you understand, let's take now as being three-dimensional as opposed to these being two-dimensional, metaphorically speaking. The brain wouldn't even get in a discussion with that, would it? Unless your brain's of no greater intelligence than your liver, which I personally don't want to contemplate. But your brain's not even going to get in kind of discussion. It just looks down and it sees what's going on. But it sees that the liver, no amount of information, that is, no amount of ordinary liver intellectualizing, you can't spread out the liver's ability to intellectualize in any way that it would ever say, oh, now I understand there could be kidneys. It can't be done. So that's why I say at that beginning level, from a lesser view, that is a two-dimensional attempted view of a three-dimensional world, would find it to be impossible. It just can't be done. Whereas from a more complex view, there is no such thing as an impossibility. You got to, that's sort of tricky and it's sort of not. If it can be said to be impossible, it's no longer impossible, is the point. Because you've got some part of one world that is less than a full execution, a full expression of that world's intelligence, that is 3 dimensions. You've got 1 dimension saying, hey, such and such is not possible. Now for it to say that such and such is not possible, you may never heard of it. Then it comes out with some word, flipper gong, that says, I'm going to tell you right now, it is not possible for there to be the existence of flipper gong. And you've never heard of flipper gong. We don't know what it is. I just made it up. But I can guarantee you this. It exists now that I've said it. Not me. But if somebody standing up and said, let me tell you, I can prove it. There's no doubt there is no such thing, regardless of these rumors, there is no such thing as flipper gong. All right, if somebody said that, if one of the dimensions said that, you can bet the farm there is such a thing. Or else one dimension would not say there's not. So nothing is impossible. The only thing that would be impossible is something that nobody's ever heard of. You understand? If somebody says it's impossible, it's too late. That's proof that it's possible. If they say it can't exist, there's the proof it does exist. From its own level, it's not a matter any longer it exists. See, at a lesser level, a two-dimensional level would say about a three-dimensional level, that can't be. Now from its own level, a three-dimensional view of a three-dimensional level would say, not that it can't be, it simply says it can't be explained. You have got to be at a more complex level. And then those two are just absolutely, there's no word for it. You know, silly, irrelevant, none of that fits. It is the brain attempting to look down. It's no longer any argument. It's the basis that all this information went out. Everything is possible. Everything is ponderable. That is, it is explicable. It's not inexplicable. It's explicable. And it's not, when I say impertinent, it's not that it's wrong. It's that all the information down at lower levels, whatever the dimension was, but in our case, three-dimensional, that being the greatest that's possible for ordinary intelligence, for old thinking, for old intellectualizing. The best that's possible for it brings it up to a level to where it looks around and sees what it calls that which is possible. But it says, all right, all these things are possible, can't possibly be explained. And they can. Not to the satisfaction of the 3D view. Because you have got to be at a more complex level, not of more intellectualizing, not of additional, not of better, of new. It is different.